Aluminum has a specific heat of 0.22, so while it isn't the lowest specific heat on the periodic table, it is still effective in cooking the cake within the correct amount of time as stated in the recipe. However, the real advantage to aluminum pan is the aluminum itself. Aluminum is one of the most malleable metals out there, which means that the pans can be very thin and lightweight, making the cake cook faster because the cake is closer to the heat itself. Rubber or plastic scrapers are effective because they are better at, well, scraping than something like a wooden spoon. They are also easier to clean because wooden spoons can sometimes retain water in some of the material. Our liquid measuring cups were made of Pyrex glass because glass measuring cups make it very easy to see the level of what you're measuring, increasing the accuracy of your measurements. Our dry measuring cups were made of stainless steel and were very lightweight. The advantage of the cups are in their shapes. The shapes make it easy to level off the material you're measuring, which you could not do in a liquid measuring cup. Lastly, we used a metal tea kettle made of stainless steel to boil the water we needed for the recipe. A metal tea kettle absorbs and conducts heat very effectively so that when the water is placed in the kettle, it is heated much more quickly. The kettle uses both conduction and convection to heat the water because it is physically touching the water and creating hot air inside the kettle that also heats the water.
Two very important ingredients for any recipe of cake are flour and sugar. As a matter of fact, flour and sugar react together to create this delicious dessert. First, let's start off with flour. Flour is a finely ground powder of grain. Since flour is so complex though, there is no one specific chemical formula. But we do know that flour is made up of three main components: starch, gluten, and gliadin. All three molecules act together to give cake its rigidity. Gluten and gliadin act together separately to make gluten, which makes foods tough. Gluten is what makes flour a toughener. However, flour is also a riser. The gluten and starch trap CO2 bubbles in the mix, which ultimately gives the cake rise. Sadly, trapping the CO2 allows the cake to lose moisture. This is where sugar comes in. Yes, sugar is a sweetener, but it also helps keep the cake moist. Unlike flour, sugar has a chemical formula because sugar is just simply sucrose. Sugar is made up of 12 atoms of carbon, 22 atoms of hydrogen, and 11 atoms of oxygen. Anyway, as I said earlier, sugar and flour work together. Specifically, the gluten and gliadin react with sugar. The sugar keeps massive amounts of gluten from forming and therefore prevents the cake from becoming insanely tough. Overall, sugar and flour are key ingredients of cake because of their gluten-forming, rigidity-forming, and moisture-preserving abilities. Sugar and flour are not the only important ingredients, though.
our show, we used a convection oven to cook our cake. The oven works by sending electricity through the metal coils surrounding the oven. The coils then heat up to the desired temperature of degrees. The coils start to transfer the heat into the air by heating up the entire oven itself. When the thermometer in the oven measures the air temperature to 350 degrees, it was time to put the cake batter in. Once the batter is put in the oven, the cake starts to bake. The cake is heated by convection and a bit of conduction from the pan. It is mostly convection though, because the hot air of the oven was the main heat source to the cake, and was the only thing that heated up the pan. In our test, one cake had been baking with baking soda and baking powder, while the other had neither. In the case of the cake with the baking powder and soda, the cake rose and filled the whole pan, while the other cake rose in the middle and the edges were left stiff and lower. This is because baking powder, when mixed with the moist cake mix and heated, creates carbon dioxide bubbles which inflate the cake and makes it have a lighter texture. This shows that the baking powder and baking soda not only help the cake rise, but also affect the texture and possibly the overall flavor of the cake.